Hello, everyone. We're going to talk about freedom of speech. Since there's been a lot of talk and controversy over the exercise of the freedom of speech, especially on college campuses, we've seen people accuse others of hate speech, and we've seen riots and great destruction to public property and private property. And so I want to start with first the Bill of Rights, um, where it came from, why we have the freedom of speech, and the proper exercise of it. But first, an introduction to the concerns that seem to um, have arisen most recently. There's an idea that people have a right not to be offended, and that right conflicts with my right to speak. And so that if I say something that is offensive, then I am violating someone's right to not be offended. Now, obviously, that right to not be offended is not in the Constitution, but it may make a little bit of sense in that, in general, I think we all agree that it's not a good idea to make people angry. It tends to bring some bad things. We tend to get fights and people get hurt and killed over depending on how much offense there is. So let's talk first about the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was constructed after the fact um, because the founders didn't believe that it was necessary. And it was added to the Constitution as the first 10 amendments to the Constitution because after great debate, um, I guess the forces that um, I guess promoted the first 10 amendments said, yeah, we really do need to secure these things just in case people in the future decided to abuse what we already took as a given. And one of the things they took as a given was the freedom of speech. In the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion, the prohibiting of the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of their grievances. Um, Back in the time when these amendments were made, it was believed that that was a given, that there is no way that anyone would infringe upon that, but it was added um, basically as an assurance that the federal government, and it only applies to the federal government, would not um, would not try to influence the religion of the people. Um, and so it doesn't establish a religion and it doesn't stop you from doing religion. So the establishment of religion says, okay, everybody has to practice a certain religion. Um, and the prohibition of it says that you cannot practice certain principles or precepts of religion. And there's a controversy there as well, where some people are saying that the practice of religion is an excuse for hate crimes. It's an excuse for things that are people deem as offensive. Um, and so, yeah, we're not necessarily going to go into that, into what religion is, because it can get in depth, but I will leave it at saying that religion includes when you don't believe in religion. And that might not sound quite obvious, but whatever you worship, whether it's money or whether it's the God of Abraham, um, everyone has a religion, and we can talk about how that religion even appears with atheism, with the global climate change, and basically how people are vying for their values and and the dogmas, the religious practices, even the propaganda that is pushed on all sides. Anyhow, all of that though does move into the freedom of speech, which is to say, anytime that you express yourself or assemble, and that just means when you choose to meet who you want to meet, where you want to meet, so in private with a select group or in public with anyone that wants to come, you have the right to do that peaceably. Without that right, you cannot express yourself because speech without privacy is not speech. Um, and we can go into why privacy is such a key role in the speech later, but the whole focus of this is going to be that the First Amendment merely says the government cannot stop you from speaking. It doesn't say if it's offensive or not. It really doesn't care. It says if you have ideas and you want to say them, then you have the right to be able to say them. Um, there are, of course, competing interests about where you say them, whether it's on private property, whether you own that property, and whether you're allowed to be there and so forth. But this amendment is all about saying that Congress can't regulate that. This goes into any regulations concerning the internet, regulations concerning who is invited to speak at a college campus, or who is allowed to speak at an assembly. Maybe it's a demonstration. It has to do with all of those things. And then the petition that government for redress. These are all related. But we're going to focus on that one narrow thing. So now we've looked at the First Amendment, and we focused on the freedom of speech. Let's go into the consequences of stopping the freedom of speech. So here you can see with this cartoon, anytime you allow a group to determine what is okay and what is not. In fact, the New York Times just in this today came out that there's a group to read over, I think it was called a sensitivity group, to read over all the manuscripts and determine if there was anything that was offensive to anybody. And then, of course, now, I'm not saying that that is government overstepping its bounds, but it is definitely censorship. In this case, the New York Times is a private company censoring their own material, which I don't believe is good, but is their right, okay, to censor themselves. All right, but anytime you censor, what we're going to find is that when you censor what you think, what you're calling hate speech, you end up censoring or hurting those who are exercising regular free speech. And this happens in the form of fear. It happens in the form, we'll go into specifics with Reddit and Core at the last two tabs. But anytime, say you're censoring somebody and I see it, I'm going to have a fear that I'm going to be censored or punished. And the reason is because while my views may not be unpopular right now, they may become unpopular in the future. And if my views are anything like the views that are being censored, then I have just cause to believe that mine may be caught up in the net. And if, as in the case of YouTube and Core, the standards for what is censored are not made clear, then that net that I'm worried about capturing me might be quite big, because if you can't define it, then you have to assume the worst case, that it may include you. So let's look at what censorship is. So as you can see here, the worst thing about censorship is, and you'll never know what the worst thing is because it's censored, right? So you can see it's all blocked out. But it kind of illustrates the idea that once you censor ideas, as bad as they may be, you'll never know the merits of what's being censored. And so how is a person supposed to know what's bad and what's good unless there can be a free exchange of ideas where we can actually talk about it and you can evaluate for yourself? So yeah, if you can't think, if you can't talk, you can't think. And if you can't think, then you'll never know what's good and what's not. Somebody just tells you this is good and this is bad, and you're just supposed to expect to believe them because you can't talk about it and come to an understanding. So lately, the college campuses have been creating very, very small zones where free speech is allowed. And they've created other zones where free speech is not allowed, or safe zones. And so that if you don't want to be offended, you can go to these safe zones, and you can recover emotionally for all the hurtful things you may have heard. And if you're ready to engage in free speech, you can go in these other zones. Well, because we have the First Amendment, that First Amendment, in principle and idea, declares all of America as a free speech zone. Even though it really only applies to the federal government, the idea is that it is declaring a fundamental human right that all men are entitled to free speech. And I think most of the Western culture has accepted that, despite these narratives undermining them. So, um, while some people want to be protected from evil ideas, um, in truth, it's only protection from reality. And if you're protected from reality, then you're only living in a fantasy. And well, if you're living in a fantasy, you're living in a dream, and you're not really living. You're just dreaming. So, really, the only way to live is to engage reality and to find peace with it. And the last thing I love from Voltaire: I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. To just show how important it is um, to allow people the right to say differing opinions. And I found personally that when people say things that are different than what I believe, even that I disapprove, it's always good. At the most, I learn something from it. At the very least, I find that the rest of the audience becomes incredibly repulsed by the ideas, and they end up turning against it. Um, so there's really nothing to lose by allowing people to speak their minds. Unfortunately, there's been a trend to speak one's mind in very obscure terms. So we'll I guess cover up the real idea with kind of fake ideas. And so here's an example. Um, Someone might say, "I believe in the woman's right to choice." Now, what's being covered up is what exactly that choice is. Now, on the surface, choice sounds good because we all like to have freedom to choose. But the choice to kill a person is not a good choice. And so the freedom of expression says, while you have the right to say, I support a woman's right to choose, I have a right to say you support a woman's right to choose to kill a person. And in that way, I'm clarifying, clarifying an idea, whereas you're hiding an idea. So in general, hiding ideas is not good because once you hide an idea, it's not really fully known what you're saying. It's not really fully recognized, the full idea. But when we go out and talk about the elephant in the room, we actually name it, then and people can evaluate for themselves. All right, so let's take a look at two main internet forums where people are posting ideas and talk about the idea of the social justice warrior, or the SJW. So Reddit is a forum that is unmoderated, as far as I know, which means that if you post something, no matter how awful it is, it's not moderated. Now, we do see that there is a report function where you can, with an account, you can report something, and I guess maybe they do have a limited amount of moderation, but from what I've seen, some really really extreme things have been posted here on Reddit. So I believe, I guess we could say that their moderation is very, very limited. I mean, if you just read through here, there's all kinds of controversial ideas. Anyhow, so when we look at, I believe it was, let's see, when we look at this one, this is basically the guy in black is the moderator. He says what's allowed, what's not allowed, and imposes the consequences for those who engage in things that are not allowed, or maybe called hate speech or offensive speech. So looking back at moderation, we can look at a forum called Quora, which is another place where people post questions and answers. And they have a much more vigorous moderation. In particular, they have a policy called BNBR, which stands for Be Nice, Be Respectful. And the idea is you can't say anything that's mean towards someone else. Unfortunately, something that represents, I guess, a belief may sound mean to somebody. So if you said, I believe that abortion is murder, then that may sound mean or offensive to somebody, because then, oh, you're saying that those who engage in abortion are murderers, right? So that might be flagged as BNBR. And as you can see, in my case, I've said a few things that, well, by expression of ideas, I risk offending others in the normal discourse of thought. And so you can see that I am not allowed it's been for about a week to answer or make comments because their moderation flagged a few of my posts as BNBR. Now, how did their moderation work? As the case of most public forums, it worked by simply saying um, the user is allowed to report because they can't obviously have enough um, people hired on staff to be able to find all the offensive stuff, including all the comments. And so they'll have a combination of rules that'll look for certain keywords, and then also if a user reports something. So um, if I didn't like this, maybe this question um, led people to consider ideas that I didn't want people considering, and I wanted to censor that. What I could do, even with the restrictions on my ability to answer and comment, is I could go down here and I could say report. And then I can report this as harassment, otherwise known as BNBR, or spam, or insincere, or whatever I want to report it as. And then what happens is that report, if I report it as a harassment, I can give him some comments, but what usually happens is that those reports are taken automatically, so that there's no personal review. And so that question would be hidden or marked as needing improvement. If I marked it as poorly written, it would be marked as needing improvement, and someone would have to go to the question and change it. Or if I didn't want to report it, I could hide discussion of an idea as a user by simply going to, and it's actually not an option for me, I could actually choose an edit. And I could edit this question, and maybe there's something I don't want people to think about, for instance, like, let's see, I don't know, I could add some idea that basically spun the question into seeming like shooting someone was bad, right? Or spin the question into seeming like shooting the person is good. And so I could add some words into the question, or remove some words I didn't like to make the question seem to advance my ideology. And people are doing that and getting away with it on Quora. So this is just one example. I'm not faulting Quora so much, except that their system enables abuse. But this is a very common thing that's done on all online forums. Then the social justice warrior is just simply a person who would use those mechanisms in order to advance their agenda. So they would ask questions to make some point of view seem awful. That's what reporters do. Or they would simply answer questions to make someone think that thinking a certain way was awful. So they spend an incredible amount of time online with asking and answering questions, trying to, I guess, as a social justice warrior, I would rather call them as a missionary, because they're basically engaged in a religious conversion attempt to convert people to whatever the cause is. They spend a lot of their time doing that. And they find great meaning and purpose in engaging in these fights or debates, or standing up for some cause. Anyhow, so that's what I wanted to go over: freedom of speech, censorship, and I guess one more thing I wanted to show you is a video that I thought was really, really well done, talking about the right to be offended, which isn't really a right. Is actually the right to be the right not to be offended is basically the right to censor, moderate, or basically stifle the discussion of ideas that you don't like. Anyhow, I want to share a video done by Jordan Peterson. That I think was exceptionally done. Let me bring it onto the screen in just a second. It is right here. Yeah, and so that's the start of the video. Let me bring it on the screen. Here we go. See if that works. Debate on gender pay gap, campus protests, and postmodernism. I think you'll find it quite interesting. He's a very interesting person who has done one of the cardinal rules that I would say, when exercising free speech, while I would not force anyone to do this, I would definitely say it's a good idea to avoid making the argument personal, which is to say, avoid calling names saying you're an idiot, you're a bigot, you're whatever, um, you're um, uh, filth of a human being, or anything like that. That all that personal stuff is unimportant to the argument. It's a distraction. It stops discussion. Um, and it's just stupid, and I see it really quite often on the left. So I'd really encourage anyone who's on the left to not only avoid it, but strongly discourage it from your peers. Anyhow, so do seek out it is really kind of an interview at Channel 4 News. Um, I think you really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. Like and subscribe and share this video with everyone. I think, and especially share that video. I think you'll really appreciate it. All right, talk to you later.